From time to time, people will say to me, Coach, who's the best player ever played a game? Who's the best all-around player in the history of basketball? Well, he's sitting here with me right now. The Big O, Oscar Robertson, the best all-around basketball player to ever play the game. And his stats will back it up, as we will talk about during this interview. A first ballot Hall of Famer. ESPN voted him one of the top 50 athletes in the last century. The NBA had him in the top 50 players of all time in the NBA. And the NABC had him as the best college basketball player of the last century. My man, Oscar Robertson, the Big O. He grew up in Tennessee and in Dickinson County, born there, born on Thanksgiving Day, interesting enough, so it's always easy to remember his birthday because he was born on Thanksgiving Day, and he lived on a farm there with his mom and his dad and his two brothers, Bailey and Henry. And they lived with their grandpa, which they affectionately call Mama Pearl and Papa Bell. Oscar, how much do you remember about those early days, those when you were growing up on the farm there in Dickinson County, Tennessee?
I remember a lot because what would happen, I went to Indianapolis early when I was 4 or 5 years old to start school. But my parents had a tradition that as soon as school was out, the next day you were on the farm in the country and assimilated in a different life. And I think it worked out fine because of the problems you had in the city, with all the city-type life, and especially in the ghetto. It was perfect for us and myself and my two brothers.
Mm-hmm. The history tells a story that your granddaddy, Daddy Marshall, lived to be the oldest man in America at that time. He lived to be 116 years old. Tell us about him.
Yeah, that was Marshall Collier. Those days, that must have been when we were going to see him. We had to go see him because my maternal grandparents and my paternal grandparents, he was my paternal grandfather, great-great-grandfather, Marshall Collier. You couldn't see him long. He would go and say hello to him, and he said all your uncles and aunts on my father's side, and actually got to see him as well. It was interesting because I didn't really understand the effect of all of that until I'd gotten to be an adult, because it's obviously with his features that he was the son of one of the slave owners. And another thing about him, George, which is so interesting to me, you read a little bit about his life. There was a river that was the Harpeth River, which you had to cross to go into town and go into Nashville. And but he always would run away, and they would catch him there. Not only him, with other people, because he couldn't swim. We'd try to swim across the river, but they never hurt him. They never hurt him at all. So he was very well thought of. The Colliers was a huge name in and around Dickinson County, Tennessee, and also the Bells, which is on my mother's side.
When you were 4 years old, Oscar, you and your brothers and your mom followed your dad on to Indianapolis, Indiana, and the family moved there, decided to move there. What made the family decide to move to Indianapolis, and how much do you remember about moving to Indianapolis?
Not a whole lot. I know my father went there because he had an aunt there in Indianapolis. Also had cousins who were working. He was looking for jobs, and naturally, Georgia, in Tennessee, where I was from, you could only go to the 8th grade anyway. And he felt that to get a little better education, he wanted to move to the city and also get work. And my mother and my father, I don't know if they were having a lot of trouble, but she just decided that after he was in Indianapolis for so long, she decided that's where she should be. So my mother was a tough lady, man. So she picks up her 3 sons, and boom, goes to Indianapolis.
And there were no high schools close by in Dickinson County that you could go to anyway. If you'd have stayed, you would have had difficulty going to high school, wouldn't you?
At that particular time, I would have, because they didn't have any accommodations for blacks going anything but the 8th grade. So there were no high school opportunities available at all. And you know, so usually after the 8th grade, you went to work on the farm. Left to go elsewhere in the world.
Mhm. So you, your mom, your two brothers, you take off on the bus for Indianapolis, and you arrive in Indianapolis. And tell us about what happened when you arrived.
George, it's fuzzy with me because I was 4 years old, but I'm sure that we walked over to an aunt's house, and that's where we stayed for a little while until got a house on Colton Street, a little shotgun house opened up. That's where we resided at that particular from that point on until I got out, really almost got out of high school. It was on Colton Street.
Yeah, they tell a story that your mom and the boys, you got it to the bus station, and of course in those days there were no cell phones and so forth, so there wasn't any way for your mom to get a hold of your dad and your aunt to let them know you were there. So you guys walked 25 blocks to Colton Street to the house.
I'm sure that's what my brothers were telling me. So that's exactly what happened. So. Things like that, like it's a little different than it is today.
Yeah. I read somewhere where you said when you were growing up, your parents never made you and your brothers feel like you were poor. What were some of the other life lessons that you learned from your mom and dad growing up, Oscar?
Well, they both worked two jobs to keep the house over our head and keep us fed. And they just very religious. My mother in the church, sang church songs, wrote church music. And went to school. And then I think by going back every summer to Tennessee really helped out quite a bit. Because you didn't realize, because when you're on a farm, you don't have to worry about money. You raise everything you need to eat. And so, which is what my grandparents did. And we had it, and I was happy because all your relatives were there, except my mother and father, of course. I had a few cousins still in Indianapolis, Indiana. But Christmas was a fun time. All we had was a little sock of hard rock candy, an apple and an orange in it. We thought that was the greatest thing in the world, George. But now Christmas has gotten a lot
more commercial.
Well, it's going the other way. Really. It's what can you get, and a lot of times people just forget what Christmas is really all about.
Yeah. When you were growing up early on, you tried to emulate your granddad, Papa Bell. You tried to talk like him, and you tried to walk like him. And, was he your first role model? Of course, in those days, we didn't know what role models were, but I guess when you look back on it now, he might have been your first role model, huh?
Yeah. He was a man very well thought of in the South where he lived. In the bottomlands where he worked, I guess he sharecropped to raise the corn for his animals during the wintertime. All the whites respected him, and they called him Uncle Early. In the South, when they want to call you, when they respect you, they don't want to call you anything. They call you Uncle or not. That's what they call my grandmother and my grandfather, Aunt Pearl and Uncle Early. So he was very well thought of. He was really a good farmer when it came to soil and whatnot. And I'm sure that helped him quite a bit down in the bottomland. But he only had two horses, and then he got two mules. And the whites, they were mechanical to a certain extent. But I don't know how he got it done. I don't know how in the world he could till all those fields, as big as those fields were, corn and hay, with just two horses. It's just unbelievable, You look at things today, every time I look at
you got to have 3 or 4 of these $1 million machines.
Yeah, a reaper got 40 rows on it, and they go in and they get the corn and they throw it in. But how could he pick corn? I guess he had a couple of people to help him pick corn in a wagon being pulled by 2 horses. You're going to all this corn back and forth all day long.
Oscar, when you were about 11 or 12 years old, your mom, she was working for a white family there in Indianapolis, and it came Christmas time, and she brought you home a special Christmas gift that kind of started to change the world of Oscar Robertson. Tell us about that.
Well, when I was a little younger than that, I used to get little sock balls, and I'd go out in the yard and I'd throw them up at an imaginary basket on a tree in front of the house and throw things like that, paper bags, whatnot, and for some strange reason, I don't know why she decided to do it. Maybe it was God's intervention. She brought me a beat-up basketball from the place where she was a domestic worker. I never forget the address of the street, George. 5550 Broadway, in Indianapolis, Indiana.
Wow, you still remember that?
Still remember that number. And she brought me this basketball, And greatest present I could ever receive, because I treasured that basketball. Now, I didn't dribble the ball in the house as much as people said I did, but I played a lot outside and late at night, and sometimes I shot in the snow and all these things. And I guess a lot of people sort of ran me home a lot of times at night.